Yo, we had some technical difficulties. But good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where in the world you are joining me from. I am a very hungry Illuminati, and this is the Crypto and Cognac podcast show, as always, live 7 p.m. sharp Atlantic Standard Time, right here, YouTube, TV. We will not be missed, right? No matter what happens, no matter where it happens, we gonna be here. So, welcome to the show. As always, what is that empty glass? As always, I am here with my friends at Hennessy. This evening, I'm not so sure what I want to drink. So, sometimes in life, you do away with the choices and you just have everything that you want. Because you know what they say? Yo, lazy, YOLO. So we're going to mix it up. We're going to make a little crypto and cognac cocktail. We're going to mix everything, right? Because it's been that kind of day. It's been that kind of week. And though it is officially the start of October 2024, we ain't going up, we're going in the other direction. But with that said, that brings me to the topic of discussion this evening, because we've seen some crazy stuff happening all across the world. And people like me wondering, why isn't Bitcoin taking off? I thought Bitcoin was supposed to be a safe haven asset. So this evening, we're going to be talking about whether or not Bitcoin is actually a safe haven asset. What does that even mean? Are we there yet? Are we going to get there one day? Let's talk about it. But before we do, as always, we have to do some housekeeping, right? So, cheers to you. But please remember that this is not a financial advisory podcast. I, Illuminati, am not a financial advisor. Nothing that I share here with you this evening or any evening previous or any evening to come should be misconstrued as financial advice. We take our crypto talk the same way we take our Henny that is on the rocks. What does that mean? The ICE rule. It's all about information, conversation, and education, not financial advice. As always, do your own research. So again, we're talking about safe haven assets. We are talking about Bitcoin's evolution, its position in terms of global markets. Is it truly a safe haven asset? How did it make that transition? How does it hold up against other well-established safe haven assets like gold? Some people might say government bonds, depending on which government we're talking about. But how does Bitcoin stack up against those well-established safe haven assets? And what is a safe haven asset anyway, right? And how does Bitcoin stack up? Has Bitcoin made the shift from a risk-on asset? What is a risk-on asset? How do traditional investors interpret it? How do crypto people interpret it? How does the rest of the world at large interpret it, right? So what defines a safe haven asset? Basically, a safe haven asset is defined by a few different categorizations, right? So stability, so it must be resistant to volatility. Liquidity, it must be easy to convert into cash, because despite how things seem, cash will probably forever be king. Is it globally accepted, right? So is it broadly recognized and trusted across borders? Can you move from Trinidad to Barbados to Jamaica to the US to Europe with it, to Japan, China, Asia, whichever part of Asia, Africa you want to be at? Is it well recognized there? And obviously, can it be used for the preservation of wealth? So historically, has it been proven to maintain purchasing power? Like I said, again, US Treasury bonds, gold, and even the Swiss franc fiat currency have historically been considered very, very strong safe haven assets. Now, we always have to go back before we come forward, right? So let's talk about the origins of Bitcoin as it relates to its consideration against these characteristics. So in the early days of Bitcoin, it was initially high risk, high reward, very much a speculative asset, and it was primarily held by the tech savvy, early adopters, Wild West traders, and it was for people who were looking for oversized returns, right, and willing to take the necessary risk associated to get that. That was the early days, right? In the early 2020s to, I would say, the mid 2010s, Bitcoin price moved in a line with the broader equity markets, right? So whenever investor appetites were optimistic about the economy, and when they were looking to take on more risk, they flocked to Bitcoin, they flocked to crypto, and they flocked to tech stocks and what we have come to know as risk-on assets. But Bitcoin has traditionally been extremely volatile. We have become very accustomed to those extreme levels of volatility, right? Prices surge during the bull run, prices contract and correct significantly during what we like to consider the crypto winter, right? So we've experienced that across the history of Bitcoin, as recent as the last bull run, 2020 into 2021, and then seeing a major correction. Yes, because of certain capitulation of companies in the crypto space, but even if those companies didn't, fold up, we might have seen similar correction. So the level of volatility that Bitcoin has experienced traditionally always kind of challenges that idea that it already is a safe haven asset. But what we did see in the most recent bull run, we're talking about March 2020 come forward. So in March 2020, Bitcoin did drop significantly along with the rest of the global markets as it related to COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic. But then conversely, with some of the other traditional markets, it did recover relatively quickly and surged. And that is where I think the initial narrative that it could be a hedge against central bank intervention and inflation really grew, because we saw that as governments across the world engaged in massive fiscal stimulus packages, monetary easing, driving inflation in their own economies and in the global economy. And we saw the significant devaluation of fiat currencies. This sparked a re-emergence of the narrative of Bitcoin being digital gold, being a hedge against inflation. And then we started seeing at the end of 2020 into 2021, even institutions and institutional investors start taking a significant look at Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation. So that is where we saw people like MicroStrategy, Tesla, some hedge funds come into the market and start allocating capital towards Bitcoin. Obviously, Tesla has kind of fallen away. MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor have not stopped for one moment, right? Their belief in Bitcoin and what its potential is, and their investors have reaped the rewards of that significantly. But that transition, I think, sparked the evolution of Bitcoin away from being such a significant speculative asset to being more of a long-term store of value, right? So these institutions and some more savvy traditional investors who made the transition over into the crypto space started seeing Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation, against currency debasement, against geopolitical uncertainty, as we saw later on with the conflict in Ukraine. So that is where I think it started. And then obviously the narrative of Bitcoin as digital gold, especially around the idea that Bitcoin has a fixed supply, one of the only assets on this planet that has a true fixed supply. Its decentralized nature also protects you from censorship by any particular government, any particular region, and any particular centralized actor on a whole. So we saw that kind of happen. We did see that Bitcoin in recent years started to have some correlation with the traditional markets, but that has decreased more and more as, I would say, the crypto market matured and as Bitcoin matured as an asset. So I think while it's not perfectly non-correlated, I think many see it as an attractive hedge against, like I said, currency crises, especially in emerging markets. So people who, especially like people in Central South America, people in Africa, people in Venezuela, Argentina, who have experienced hyperinflation, those people have been more ready to accept something like Bitcoin as a safe haven, as a hedge against inflation. And it has become clearer, especially in those, like I said, emerging markets, where the economic instability, where the capital controls, where the currency devaluation are more significant. We here in the West, even us here in the Caribbean, because we are so closely tied to the US dollar, we have not yet, and I would say put a caveat with yet, experienced the kind of hyperinflation that we've seen in some countries in Africa, as we've seen in some countries in Latin America, South America. I'm here in Trinidad and Tobago, our close neighbor, Venezuela, they've experienced significant currency devaluation to the point where their old currency, people started using it to like knit baskets and that kind of thing, because it was more valuable to be used for arts and craft than it was to actually for its actual purchasing power, right? But what we are seeing is that kind of extending itself across the world. So it's no longer just concentrated in Africa or South America, as the case may be. We are seeing a broadening of this epidemic of inflation. We are seeing central banks need to get involved more and more in propping up economies. We are sitting in a moment in time where the US national debt is ballooning every single day, $35+ trillion. And if you understand what that number really means, 35 sounds like a small number, but $1 trillion is, almost insane. I think Bitcoin is increasingly being viewed as a hedge, right? And unlike gold, Bitcoin has only been through a limited number of economic cycles, right? And critics argue that this hasn't been a true test of whether or not Bitcoin is what is dependable in a true global economic downturn. But if we understand what led to the creation of Bitcoin, if we understand that it was a global economic crisis that spurred the development of Bitcoin, and for those critics, I would say that unlike gold, unlike treasury bonds, unlike government bonds on a whole, Bitcoin is easier to transport across state lines, country borders, and take it with you in the event that you really have to grab and go. You know what I mean? Like there is a meme out there that shows what $1 billion in gold looks like compared to $1 billion in Bitcoin. So even though Bitcoin hasn't been as tested, I think we're moving more and more into a digitally prevalent world. And I think a digital form of gold is more apt for the experiences that we're going to endure going forward. I think for Bitcoin to be fully considered as a safe haven asset, it needs to be viewed as reliable. I think its acceptance globally needs to kind of grow. I think while institutions adopting Bitcoin as a long-term hedge helps propel that narrative, but I think where we still have, these ETFs and a lot of the new purchasing power behind Bitcoin and blockchain being kind of centralized as these ETFs custody these funds. I think we're not there yet. I think it's gonna take some time. I think obviously we continue to have these periods of volatility. We were just up to 64,000 a couple of days ago. We're back down to 60,000, and I think one of the major arguments against Bitcoin being a true safe haven asset is that of the volatility compared to gold, which has been around hundreds of years. I think people's comfort with decentralization versus centralization. A lot of people like the idea of decentralization, but maybe not the reality of it in terms of the lack of controls. We always say here one of the greatest things about crypto is that you are your own bank, but one of the major drawbacks to crypto is that you are your own bank. So I think some of the transfer of responsibility around control, around custody, is going to continue to play a part in terms of Bitcoin not gaining the adoption necessary to really take its rightful place as a true safe haven asset. But I think as Bitcoin continues to mature, I think as the institutional adoption continues, I think as people become more and more comfortable with blockchain on a whole, as we see people like Visa, MasterCard, central banks with CBDCs, PayPal, all these different payment platforms, all these different companies using NFTs and calling it whatever. I think as people become more and more aware of the value proposition of crypto, of blockchain, I think we're going to just see more and more comfort around it. And I think it's just a matter of time before we get to the point of full acceptance. And I mean, it's not going to be a beautiful day necessarily, because I think what's ultimately going to push us over the line to that place is going to be centered around some tragic events globally, right? And a lot of people are going to be left in very, very painful positions. And that is unfortunate that it is going to take something traumatic that is going to really drive home the value proposition of Bitcoin, of blockchain, of cryptocurrencies in general. But like I always say, it has to happen, right? Because adoption is inevitable. So for me, my thoughts, Bitcoin isn't yet a global safe haven asset. For us in crypto, absolutely, right? We understand, right? And more people are being converted to this side every single day from every single part of the world. And I have no doubt that we're going to get there. We're not quite there yet. I think we still have a lot of people holding on to the traditions. But Bitcoin ain't going nowhere. 21 million. Less and less of them available every single day. So hopefully, me, you, other people who are watching this podcast live, hopefully we get to one before the time runs out, right? Because there could only be 21 million of us with one maximum. So guys, that's it for me. Thank you as always for sharing a drink with me, for sharing your time with me, for sharing in conversation with me. Shout out to my boy Stevie J as always. Rennie, what up, buddy? Tiba, Twilly, Anil, Anom, Dominic, Eddie, everybody in the chat. Be blessed, guys. Continue to stack those sats. Continue to educate yourself about this crazy cryptic world of cryptocurrency. And I will see you next week for episode 28, season 5. 3 more episodes left. Crazy. And then we take a little break. And then we back, right? I have some exciting. Oh my God, I'm so excited. Anyway, guys, peace out. Illuminati, be blessed. Cheers.